Hi there, hope you're having a pleasant day wherever you may be. Looks like it's time for another adventure, but as you can see, this one's a little different than the previous because A, I'm still at home, and B, I don't know where I'm going. That's where this dart and that map come into play. I'm going to toss the dart at the map and see where I'm going to be heading. Now, I only have 9 days to play with, so I limited it to the western US. And also, just because we're the dart lands, I'm not going to spend the whole time there. It's just more of a catalyst. I did this a few years ago. Those that remember, I did the road to Scottsbluff. That was like a pre-and-I on the road thing, and that worked out really well. So let's hope that this one does the same. All right, let's see. All right, well, it actually landed in Lassen. I guess I'm going to Lassen. So the dart landed near Lassen National Park, and like I said before, the dart landing is just supposed to be a catalyst, more or less just a direction for me to go. So I got to thinking, Lassen is at the southern end of the Cascade Mountain Range. The Cascade Mountains are a series of volcanic mountains that extend all the way from Washington down to Northern California. And the reason that there's a series of volcanoes there is because the Juan de Fuca plate sits right off that coast of the United States up in that northwestern corner. It's subducting under the North American plate, and that subduction causes a lot of heating and magma to rise up, and it's right along that edge there that you get a series of volcanoes. So I figured, hey, I haven't really explored the Pacific Northwest by car. Done a little bit by train, but I was like, hey, this is a good opportunity to see a part of the country that I've never explored thoroughly before. I was really excited, so here we are in the Pacific Northwest. I figured what better place to start this video than one of the more well-known mountains in the range, which is Mt Rainier. And why is Mt Rainier so well-known? Well, that's because it's been photobombing the hell out of Seattle forever. If you've ever seen a picture or postcard from the city of Seattle, you've probably seen this majestic beast in the background lurking. That is on clear days at least. Like I said, the Cascade Range is a series of volcanoes, so naturally Mount Rainier is considered a volcano. It is a dormant volcano, so it hasn't erupted for quite some time, and it's not expected to erupt for quite some time. With that said, it sits at about 14,000 feet and change. I forget what the exact number is. I wasn't quite sure what to expect prior. I wasn't sure, like, do you just come and stare at the mountain? What do you do here? And to some degree you could. This mountain is really beautiful, especially on this beautiful blue sky day today. There's a lot of textures and things like that. The snow and all. There's like a little, right there, like a little shelf of snow that, I don't know, to me it looks like it's about to give away. But then again, what the hell do I know? But once you get here, you realize there's a ton of trails. You have a lot of options for hiking here. You can climb the mountain if you like, if you have alpine experience. There's glaciers that you can walk on. There's all sorts of things to do here, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful place. Like, it's just like a little slice of nature that's preserved. Like, it's really beautiful here. It's cool. Now I'm just seeing a little sliver of the park here. There's Mount Rainier is kind of at the center of the national park, and you have several entrances from around that you can go and visit, and visitor centers and things like that. I came to the Paradise Visitor Center, and I was not disappointed. This place is, I could see why they call it paradise. Now this region is also known for snowpack, snowfall. It's on average the most heavily snowed upon place in the lower 48. So that's an impressive feat right here in Washington. One of the things this park is known for is the wildflowers. John Muir, there's a quote down by the visitor center. I'm going to summarize. He was much more eloquent, but that this is the best place in all of his travels that he'd seen for wildflowers. That's pretty high praise coming from a guy that's seen most of the western U.S. It's September now, so I'm sure you come in April, May, June, you probably get a lot more vibrant colors. Already starting to get some of the reds for fall, but it's still pretty gorgeous, pretty cool looking. So, like most national parks, there is an historic hotel on the premises. This one is the Paradise Inn, opened in 1917 by a guy named Hans Furlacher. I'll have to check that one. There's a lot of old furniture that he helped design or help build over the course of several years, like the chairs, tables. There's a mail slot in there. Inside is also really cool. It's got a lot of big timbers and things like that. Nice place to check out. Mt Rainier National Park is a beautiful place, and I'm only scratching the surface of this place. There's so many more places to explore, but the little bit that I saw, the views I got of the mountain and the surrounding area, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. I would say check it out. I wish I had more time to do a little bit more exploring, but that's going to be a common theme, not only of this video and of this show, but overall of my travels in general. So get used to that kind of thing. Now here I am at the picturesque Columbia River Gorge, and as the name would suggest, it was a gorge carved out by the Columbia River. Columbia River is the largest river in the Pacific Northwest, and one of only a handful that cross the Cascades. Columbia River originates in British Columbia and then cuts down to the Oregon-Washington border, where it created this 80-mile canyon here. It's been designated a national scenic area, which you can kind of tell. It's also known for, it has like a wind tunnel effect. So it's known for being really windy, which I've personally experienced so far. It's been a really pain in the butt trying to find a place to get decent audio. But it's also, you wouldn't guess it, but it's also a spot for windsurfers and kite surfers. So that's kind of cool. There's also a lot of things to look at, like waterfalls and things like that. And just looking at the gorge in a distance, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. There's only a handful of places to cross the river, one of them being the Bridge of the Gods behind me here. It's a toll bridge, just like a handful of the ones that cross. There was a bridge further down the river that was also a toll bridge, but I figured this one was a little more picturesque, so I was like, yeah, let's do this one. If I'm gonna pay, I'm gonna get my money's worth. One of the many scenic highlights in the gorge is the off-photographed Molten Falls. It is the second tallest year-round waterfall in the country. It has some history to it. It features the old Molten Falls Lodge, as well as an old bridge that was built in 1914. It's a cool little spot to check out, sort of an Instagrammer's heaven. It is one of 77 falls that go into the gorge on just the Oregon side. There's plenty more on the Washington side. But yeah, it's pretty cool, worth checking out. But parking can be a little bit of a pain, so keep that in mind. Now, traveling the gorge, both sides have transportation. There's railroad tracks on both sides. On the Washington side, there's a 2-lane state highway, and then on the Oregon side, there's an interstate. Personally, I've been driving on both for various stretches. Kind of preferred the Washington side because you have a little more opportunity to pull over to the side, take some pictures, things like that. The interstate is very sterile, like a typical interstate. You get a few glimpses of the gorge, but I just prefer the 2 lanes a little better. And here is Mount Hood, which is often seen in the distance from the city of Portland. It sits at about 11,000 feet and change. It is considered pretty much a dormant volcano. There's not a lot of activity expected here. There's a lot of recreational activities that can be done here during the summer months, obviously hiking and things like that. During the winter months, there's skiing. You can see some of the ski lifts there behind me. And like many of the other Cascade summits, it is home to several glaciers. In general, there's just a lot of skiing activity in this area, not just here on Mount Hood, but on some of the other lower mountains here in the area. Mount Hood is not designated as a national park or national monument. However, it is part of national forest land, so it's kind of distinct in that regard. Now, situated on Mount Hood is the Overlook Hotel. Excuse me, the Timberline Lodge. This hotel was used as the exteriors for the hotel in The Shining. Now, it was built back in the late 1930s as a part of FDR's New Deal. And it's considered sort of a crown jewel of the public works done in the state of Oregon. Inside, there's a lot of rustic elements, a lot of Native American influence. Really cool looking interior. It was designed by the same guy that's done a lot of the national park hotels, like the Ahwahnee and things like that. It is still a functional hotel. Apparently, it books really fast. but they do their best to maintain a really old feel to it. It's pretty awesome inside. And it also has, it's sort of like a museum too. There's a lot of old artifacts of like early climbing and things like that. Pretty cool place to check out. So here I am at Crater Lake. Crater Lake is the result of what used to be Mount Mazama. Mount Mazama was a volcano here in the Cascade Range that last had a really significant eruption about 7,700 years ago. The eruption was so massive that it's the largest since the Yellowstone supervolcano last erupted over 600,000 years ago. So we're talking a big eruption. So what happened was during that last major event, large vents formed that released a lot of gas-rich lava. That eventually emptied out the magma chamber, and the mountain could not support its own weight and collapsed in on itself, creating this huge crater. That process, surprisingly, only took a few days. It took eons to build the mountain, and it only took a few days to collapse it. Then eventually rain and snowmelt began to fill in the crater with water, leaving us with the lake we have today. Now, with that said, there are a handful of things that make Crater Lake very unique. One of them is that at its deepest point, it's over 1,900 feet deep, which makes it the deepest lake in the country, ninth deepest in the world. It also has a very beautiful blue color to it, and it also has amazing clarity in the water. That is the result of it not being fed by streams. Streams bring in sediment and cloud the water. This one's fed by rain and snowmelt, so there's nothing there to cloud the water, making it a very pristine location. One thing about the water level of the lake is that it's pretty consistent. You would think that if it's just constantly being fed by rain and snowmelt, that it would just spill over like a tub. But no, the evaporation pretty much matches how much water it gets. So it more or less stays about the same, which is pretty cool. Now, it's not completely extinct as a volcano. Wizard Island, and there's another cone just below the water line that are evidence of eruptions since the major eruption that created the lake. At its widest, the lake is 6 miles across. One thing that's sort of easy to get lost is the scale of everything here. Like for instance, Wizard Island, that's over 700 feet tall from the water level. There's a crater on top of that. That's almost the length of a football field, but you really don't get a sense of that just looking at the island. It wasn't until I saw a boat leave the island that kind of gave me a sense of the scale of how big the island is. Phantom Ship, that's, I believe, over 140 feet from the water level. So it's really easy to lose sense of how massive this lake is. One thing I do notice that it is very calm and quiet here. Now, there's no like recreational activities, or very minimal, I should say, because there's a boat tour that the NPS offers, and also swimming, but it's only from one location, and there's no scuba gear, snorkel equipment, or wetsuits. The water is cold, so if you're swimming and don't have a wetsuit, you're not going to be in there for too long, so they know what they're doing. Kind of just works itself out. Like most national parks, there is a lodge on the premises, the Crater Lake Lodge. However, when they built it, it wasn't built particularly well or particularly stylish. So it's not quite as grand as the ones in other parks. Eventually, they did a 5-year renovation project in the late 80s, early 90s to kind of bring it up to speed to be able to handle the conditions of Crater Lake better. But yeah, it's one of the more or less impressive ones that I've seen. It's really kind of a shame how much national parks clear out at sunset, because people are really missing out. It's a damn shame. Every single viewpoint I've passed, it's been almost empty. If anything, there's one car, guy's taking his pictures, gets back in, takes off. But for the most part, you got your run of the place. It's pretty cool. As far as visiting Crater Lake, it's pretty accessible during the summer months now. There's a road that goes all the way around the crater, and it's pretty easy to get around. There's a lot of viewpoints, a lot of places to stop. There's plenty of trails to hike and things like that. You could probably, if you didn't want to like invest too much time, you could probably knock it out in just a few hours. But it is kind of isolated, so if you're going to make your way over here, you know, stick around, make it worth it. Now, here I am at Mount Shasta at over 14,000 feet tall. It's not the tallest in the Cascade Range, however, it is considered to be the largest. Now, it does have an eruptive history. It usually erupts every couple hundred years or so, but over the last four or 5,000 years, it's erupted several times. And then over the eons, it's erupted significantly several times to the point where it's blown out and rebuilt itself up, which you can tell by the different ages of the various rocks on the cone there. Not to mention, based on some of the geologic evidence in the surrounding valleys too. Unlike some of the other mountains in the Cascade Range, this one doesn't really have like a national park infrastructure around it to like, cater to tourist needs and all that. Instead, it's kind of served by the small communities around like Mount Shasta, McLeod, things like that. This is a very prominent peak in the area, so you can see it upwards of 100 miles away. Visually, it's a very picturesque mountain, so if you're driving through this neck of the woods, granted, you'll probably see it for a long distance, but hey, try to find a good vantage point where you can kind of look, just admire the beauty for a few minutes. Truth be told, when I actually looked at where the dart landed, it landed on the words for Lassen, but not the actual park. It technically landed closer to this town called Boerne, but unfortunately, not a whole lot to do here, so just kind of took a look around, and that's about it that I did in Boerne. Now, there's not much going on in town. It's a pretty standard run-of-the-mill small town, so I didn't have high hopes. But then I found out about Boerne Falls. I came, checked it out. It's pretty freaking cool. The water drops 129 feet. It's slowly been eroding over the years. This waterfall used to be a mile downstream. What's interesting is that further upstream, the water seeps into the ground. It kind of follows an underground channel before it's forced out again. That's when it reaches the falls. You kind of see a little bit of that right here with the water seeping out there. It's pretty cool looking. This area is also very important to the local Native Americans. They hold rituals and ceremonies here, and they have for as long as they can remember as a tribe. The pool here is about 20 feet deep. The water is about 48 degrees, so they advise not swimming in it. Darn. Overall, it's really cool. So cool that Teddy Roosevelt described this as the 8th wonder of the world. Not bad, huh? So Lassen National Volcanic Park is obviously Mount Lassen is at the centerpiece of it, about 10,000 feet high, but it's far from the only volcano in the park. Lassen is one of the few places that boasts 4 different types of volcanoes. Now, Lassen has also erupted recently. It erupted in 1914, which was documented by a gentleman named Loomis. He got 6 slides of the eruption, and that was pretty groundbreaking at the time. And then in 1915, there was a small eruption, and then 3 days later, a bigger eruption that wiped out a little area called the Devastated Area. Now, you can hike to the top of Lassen. It's about a 2,000-foot elevation gain in about 2.5 miles, so it's pretty intense. And maybe one of these days I'll try it, but not today. I don't have the time. So this area is known as Bumpus Hell. It was named after a guy whose last name was Bumpus a long time ago, before this was a national park. He was leading a tour group in here, explaining to them how the ground is very unstable. And as he was doing that, the ground gave way underneath him, fell, I believe, into a mud pot, and severely burned his leg. So that's how this got its unusual name. Now, Bumpus Hell is a great example of all the geologic activity that goes on here in Lassen. It's a nice little sampler platter. You got your fumaroles, you got your hot springs, you got your mud pots. It's all kind of here for you to look at. It's a really cool looking landscape. It's all stained white and like orangish from all the chemicals and all that that the water gets turned into. Now, because the ground is so unstable, you have to walk on boardwalks, which are currently being rebuilt, so this is as far as we can go. The rest of it's all closed off for the moment. Walking up here, I severely underestimated the length of a 1.9 mile hike, but I was rejuvenated once I got a look at this thing. I'm a sucker for interesting geology. What's really cool about Lassen is that you can get pretty close to some pretty intense geology. It's on a smaller scale than like Yellowstone, but you're getting a lot less crowds, and if you live in California, it's a lot shorter. So this is pretty cool, or odd. You know what I mean. All in all, I enjoyed my time here in Lassen. I think it's worth checking out, especially if you like geology. There's a lot of cool geology to look at up close and personal, and beautiful. It's just a beautiful area. So yeah, Lassen. All right, well that does it for this one. I guess. Wait a second. I came to the Pacific Northwest. I looked at a bunch of volcanoes, and I didn't go to. Now here I am at Mount St. Helens, which was known for its pretty significant eruption back in 1980. Unfortunately, it's kind of obscured by the clouds. We're in the Pacific Northwest, and she's doing Pacific Northwest things, so you can't really get a good view of it. The mountain used to have a very conical shape, very beautiful mountain actually, very symmetrical. The story of Mount St. Helens begins in about March of 1980. That's when geologists began to notice that there were about 200 to 300 earthquakes per day. Now they were small but measurable. They also began to notice a bulge forming on the northern slope. They monitored the bulge, and they noticed that it was growing upwards of 5 feet per day. Yes, that's right. It was about 450 feet by May of that year. Now, what was happening was under the surface there was magma that was making its way up. Magma hit a previous lava dome at the top of the mountain, and it couldn't penetrate through it, so it was bulging out the side there. Well, all the while, that process, pressure was just building inside the mountain. It's essentially like a bottle of soda was being shook up for 2 months. Then on May 18th, 1980, a small earthquake jarred the land of the bulge loose, caused a massive landslide, the largest in recorded history, and released all of that pressure, like as if you unscrewed the cork, the cap of that soda bottle. Now, because of that bulge and the landslide that kind of came from the side, it created a lateral blast. So ordinarily, if this would have come out from the top, it would have been a pretty average eruption, but because it came toward the side, it created a lot more damage. It leveled all the forests that were in this area here. The landslide itself kind of came into this valley here, and then the ridge more or less stopped that and kind of sent it over into the Toutle River Valley there and did a lot of damage in there. The smoke and ash was able to go over the ridge easier, so it caused damage around. However, on that ridge, you can see there's significantly less damage if you look at like just the greenery. It's more green on the slope that's opposite the eruption. The side that's facing, completely devastated. Granted, it was 38 years, so it's had a lot of time to recover, so there's lots of life and things back. But when it first happened, this was described as a moonscape because it just decimated everything. As the landslide occurred, there was a USGS scientist over on this ridge over here, and he exclaimed over the radio, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." Unfortunately, he was so close to the blast, he only had about 45 seconds before he was inundated by the debris and everything. The ridge was known as Coldwater Ridge. Now it's known as Johnston Ridge, and atop it is the visitor center known as Johnston Visitor Center, named in his honor. The eruption dramatically reshaped this landscape by adding upwards of 150 feet of just debris from the mountain that just kind of spilled out all over this region. So what you're seeing here is nothing of what it looked like before. And that's not just because the trees were blown down. That's because the actual landscape was altered. Streams are in different places, lakes are in different places, completely different. Interestingly enough, this is one of 2 lakes that were formed by the eruption. This is Coldwater Lake. What happened is debris plugged up a stream. Lake was formed. Wasn't here before. Pretty cool. Behind me is Spirit Lake. Now this lake was dramatically altered by that 1980 eruption. The landslide hit the water and raised the lake bed by 200 feet and also doubled the surface area of the water. Now you'll notice that there's a bunch of little matchsticks all strewn about inside that lake. Well, those aren't matchsticks. Those were once mighty proud forests. What happened is obviously they got blown down. Some of them got blown into the lake, but others were on the ridges behind. The water went up and washed them all into the lake there, and now they're still there, close to 40 years after the eruption. Shortly after that 1980 eruption, scientists began to notice another dome forming inside the crater, and this gave them a very good opportunity to study and monitor the situation, which sort of came to a head between 2004 and 2008 when there was a series of eruptions here. Obviously, they weren't as catastrophic as in 1981, but the mountain was different now, so it behaves differently. But they were able to monitor it and had a pretty good understanding of it, and they'll continue to monitor it and learn from this mountain. All in all, visiting Mount St. Helens was pretty freaking cool. This is a place that's been on my radar for a really long time. Ever since I was a little kid, I had this book in elementary school, which they actually had in the gift shop. I can't believe they still print it. And I had this little wave of nostalgia for a minute. But yeah, Mount St. Helens is an awesome place, very interesting. It's a little bit of a bummer that it got enshrouded in clouds like that, but hey, that's the gamble you take when you visit a place in the Pacific Northwest. It's just kind of how it is. But yeah, it was really cool. I highly recommend people that are in the area, come on, take a look. This is awesome stuff here. So I was a little bummed yesterday because for the most part the mountain was shrouded in clouds. Today, kind of on a whim, I decided to come to a different viewpoint. Not because I was hoping to see the mountain, I kind of just assumed it would be in clouds again. I wanted to see Spirit Lake. Well, lo and behold, I got a nice view of the mountain. So hey, perseverance pays off, kids. Don't give up on your dreams.
Doctor, doctor, can you cure me? A little pill, a little something to assure me I'm gonna feel better when I walk outside your door. He said, son, 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 I don't know what you're needing. Your body is fine, it's your soul that's bleeding. I got the same disease, ain't nobody yet found the cure. But if you find it, bottle it, you'll be a rich man for sure. This ain't no joke. You gotta know how to benefit and won't get broke. To keep your peace in the big bad game, you know you gotta go a little loco to stay safe.
Well, that does it for this one. Thanks for joining me on this little adventure of following where the dart landed, which ultimately got us to the Pacific Northwest, the old PNW, and more specifically the Cascade Mountain Range. I hope you enjoyed checking out places like Mount St. Helens, Mt Rainier, Crater Lake, Lassen, and all the other places that we went to. This is a part of the country, a region that I've wanted to explore for a really long time, so I'm really glad I got to do that. But one thing I did learn while driving around is that there's so much more to this place than the preconceived spots that I wanted to check out coming into it. So like I always say, this is not an exhaustive list of places to go or things to do in the area, but I do highly encourage you to do a little exploring in this area. There's a lot of cool things to look at that we didn't even cover here. So I hope you had a good time, and I guess I'll see you on the next one. Now, there may not actually be much in the town of Boerne, but just outside of it, there's this defunct rail bridge. And if it looks a little familiar, it might, because you probably remember it with a little kid saying, "Train!" Yep, this is the bridge from Stand By Me. They've taken out the rails, and it's even barricaded now, so you can't go walking on it. But yeah, pretty cool, huh? Figured this was a nice way to end the video.